Hi there and welcome to another video from me, this tutor, and in this video we're looking at Germany 1890 to 1945 and we're looking at how Hitler controlled Germany, and I'll be tutoring you through how to do the bullet point question for the AQA exam. Okay, so the bullet point question is the last question on the AQA exam. It's the 12 marker. You're given 2 bullet points. You've got to decide which is the most important for the question you're given. In this case, I'm going to talk you through the ideas of terror and fear, or propaganda and censorship, and how one of those could be the most important for Hitler controlling Germany. And I'm going to tutor you through how to answer the question correctly. So firstly, though, you need to revise your knowledge. Do have a look at my revision videos in my playlist on these topics. Also have a look at the pages in my revision guide. And then come back to me when you're ready, and we'll have a quick quiz and we'll tutor you through how to answer the question correctly. Right, so here's a quick quiz on Nazi control tactics. So have a look through these 8 questions and use them maybe to help you revise looking through your revision guide or looking at my revision videos. So pause me now and see if you can work out all the answers. Okay, so here are some of the answers then. Who led the terror system in Nazi Germany? Of course, it was Heinrich Himmler, who was leader of the SS, and we often hear this called the SS police state, and that means he's leader of all the control systems that might be around terror and fear. So how many crimes were punishable by death by 1943? Well, 46 crimes were punishable by death. Many of those appeared during the Second World War that might be crimes that are traitorous to the nation, like listening to a foreign radio station was death penalty because you are clearly being a spy maybe, or a foreign collaborator. Question 3. Name 4 key parts of this terror system, the SS police state, as it might be known. So you've got the Gestapo, the secret police. You've got the concentration camps, where you might be sent to be re-educated. Concentration camp, be aware, is not a death camp. You might be sent there, punished, and then sent back home again. So the first concentration camp was Dachau, built in 1933. So the other groups are important: the SS and the SD. The SS were more important as what we're going to consider. They had the black shirts and they could arrest you and have the powers to detain you. And then, of course, we have the Nazified police courts. Non-Nazi police could be removed. We have Nazified laws and judges running the courts. Question number 4. Who led the propaganda system in Nazi Germany? Of course, you've got Joseph Goebbels, led the Ministry of Propaganda. Be aware, propaganda's got 2 aspects to it: propaganda and censorship. Propaganda is trying to convince you of things. Censorship is stopping information getting to you so you never hear anything bad necessarily. So what was the name of the Nazi newspapers? You've got Der Stürmer was the Nazi newspaper. That might be put up on public display boards so that people could read it in various places, and obviously it tried to sort of interfere in people's lives. What was the cheap radio of the Nazis called? So you got the People's Receiver, or sold to people for very little money to make sure that everyone could listen to radio that was controlled, had the Nazified radio, couldn't listen to foreign radio, so it's controlling information. So you've got a censorship there. Firstly, it's stopping foreign broadcasts, and then it's got a propaganda element by having Nazified news and speeches in them. So by 1939, the People's Receiver was very successful. 70% of people had one. How many public loudspeakers were put up so people could listen to the Nazi messages? So in parks and public areas, they had loudspeakers broadcasting the Reich Radio Company, the Nazified radio. There were 6,000 of these large speakers. Okay, so here's our question. It says, which of the following was the more important reason why Hitler had control of German people in the years 1933 to 1939? Was it terror tactics or propaganda tactics? Explain your answer with reference to both bullet points. And it's 12 marks. Can I just remind you that you can have different wording here in the question? You could have SS police state or fear instead of terror. You could have censorship, is obviously slightly different to propaganda, but I've seen censorship written in recent exams. What would be the success criteria for this question? How would you answer a question correctly? What do you need to include in your answer? Now, how many paragraphs? Are we going to do P paragraphs, etc.? Have a think now. What would you do to answer this question successfully? Okay, so here's what I think are the main things you need to do. Yes, we need to write in peel paragraphs explaining each bullet point. And we're doing peel paragraphs because as I'll talk about in a moment, we need to evaluate a little bit. So our link needs to be to an evaluation. Of course, we need to write a point, setting out an argument about how the bullet point you're talking about controls people. set up an argument, then back that up with some factual evidence. Of course, focus on the question when you explain. How did this help control? We've given a point, setting out an argument, given a bit of evidence, then we're going to come back to the question again. We're going to go, this controlled German people because, and we're going to explain the consequence. Then we can evaluate. We can link to a further positive, say, furthermore, this was really important in controlling people because, and give another idea. Or if we think it's less important, we can say, however, this was less important because, and explain a negative. In terms of a conclusion, we can compare our ideas a little bit at the end just to make it clear that one is more important than the other because one is more reliant on the other one, perhaps. So now let's start making a plan of our ideas. So first we're going to talk about terror tactics, and then we'll talk about propaganda tactics. So have a look through revision guide pages and list some ideas. Start to create an idea of what your plan is going to be. Pause me now and come up with some ideas. Okay, so I've come up with SS and concentration camps and Gestapo, first of all. They created fear amongst people. People did not oppose the Nazis because they feared they were being watched. They feared the SS would knock on the door. They feared going into a concentration camp. So a great amount of fear was created. Then the police and courts. New laws led to more death penalties. So you didn't oppose the Nazis because the whole system of legal laws was also against you. Again, creating more fear against the legal system within Germany. So what about propaganda? So propaganda and censorship in newspapers and radio meant the news was controlled. You didn't really hear negative things, you only heard positive things. So you didn't really have any reason to oppose the Nazis. Life seemed good. So you could talk about some examples of how newspapers were shut down. The People's Receiver only gave Nazi information, no foreign information. And secondly, you could talk about a point of indoctrination. So propaganda was indoctrinating and brainwashing people. Films, posters, cultural events, people were being brainwashed. So I have some ideas of a couple of films, poster campaigns that might develop that argument. So how are we going to structure this? Well, we're going to say something like, firstly, the terror tactics were quite or very important. Reason why Hitler controlled Germany, because it set out our argument. Back it up with some evidence. For example, and give an example of some terror or fear, if that's what we're talking about. This helped control Germany because. Now talk about some consequences. Maybe we could talk about people being controlled. Maybe we've got a social group. We could talk about maybe an opposition that's crushed. We could talk about something. Furthermore, this helped Hitler control Germany because if we're saying it's very strong, we're going to say furthermore. If we don't think it's as strong, we've said it's only quite important. We can say, however, this is not so important because, and try and evaluate. So let's give this terror paragraph a go then, shall we? Come up with an opening point. I'm going to say it's very important, but you can choose your own idea. You say it's quite important if you like. Come up with what you think you want to argue. Pause me now and come up with your opening argument. Okay, so I've said terror tactics were very important in controlling Germany because they scared opposition into not acting against the Nazis due to fear. So now give an example. For example, okay, so here's what I've said. I've said, for example, the Gestapo network and informers meant that opponents could be caught and sent to concentration camps. Could include the SS in that, of course, if we wanted to. Okay, so now how does this control people? Think about some impact knowledge and how people are controlled. Now, how's their behaviour affected by the Gestapo or informers or fear of the concentration camp? Pause now and give it a go. Okay, so here's what I've said. I said this controlled people because they had phones tapped, there were listening devices monitoring them, and there were informers telling Gestapo about opposition behaviour. It meant that potential opposition groups became inactive. It never happened. This meant people could not speak out in open air or in private against the Nazis, and therefore organised opposition could not develop easily. So therefore, opposition crushed, control developed. Now think about furthermore. So I've said a very positive response. I think it's very important. So I'm going to say furthermore. If you said it's not very important, you need to say however. So pause now and give your wider evaluative link. Right, so I said, furthermore, the SS had the power to imprison opponents in concentration camps without a trial using the February 1933 Emergency Powers Act. The first concentration camp appeared in March 1933 at Dachau. From June 1933, opposition groups were banned. Many were sent to camps to be re-educated. This created widespread fear, and people knew any form of opposition could lead to the SS sending you to a camp. So I've got lots and lots of facts and ideas in there to set out that opposition groups were banned and couldn't happen. So now we need a second paragraph on propaganda. Here's what it's going to look like. We're going to say, however, the propaganda tactics were quite or very important because. We're going to give an example. We're going to say this helped control Germany because, and then we're going to say furthermore or however. So remember, we can talk about two ideas here: censorship and controlling information. So there was lack of things to complain about, and that you were left happy all the time with the state of things in Germany. And there's also brainwashing. So again, you might not be complaining so much. So although we said it's very important in the first paragraph, we could also say it's very important in this one, and then try and come to a conclusion at the end, potentially, because there's two really strong positive arguments here. So pause me now and give your idea a go. So I've said, however, propaganda is also very important in controlling the people of Germany because it indoctrinates people to be Nazi and stops negative news that could lead to opposition. For example, the propaganda ministry of Goebbels flooded Germany with Nazi ideas through newspapers like Der Stürmer, radio, cinema, films, and control of books, and stopped negative ideas through censorship. These methods controlled people because they only heard positive news through the radio and newspapers. In particular, the People's Receiver was sold very cheaply, and they could only broadcast the Reich radio company and not foreign stations. This meant people did not hear alternative ideas to Nazi messages. So that sentence there about in particular, the People's Receiver, that's a really important consequence knowledge, because I'm saying that people's information was controlled. Another really good example could be the cutting back non-Nazi newspapers from 3,700 to 1,000. Now the Nazi press office controlling information. That'd be another really good example of impact knowledge and how the solution developed to control people. Then I've got my wider furthermore. So furthermore, German culture was carefully controlled as undesirable books were burnt and films were created with a Nazi message to indoctrinate and brainwash people like the anti-Semitic Eternal Jew. This controlled people as German culture only spread Nazi ideas and beliefs. So finally, you can come up with your conclusion. Have an idea of what you might conclude. So obviously, I've said both of them are quite important. So maybe pause now and decide what you think. Come up with a conclusion. Just for an example, here's what I've come up with. I said, in conclusion, terror was more important as this removed opposition groups from society and meant that they were unable to share their message. The success of terror was shown by only one group emerging in opposition during these years, the Confessional Church, and most of its members were sent to a concentration camp. Whereas propaganda could limit the opposition message, but it could not eliminate it or their message. For instance, propaganda could support the German Christians, but it did not stop the Confessional Church from appearing in that example of church. Therefore, propaganda could only be successful if there was a successful terror system. So I hope that gives you a nice idea of a conclusion you can come up with, how you can compare the two to come up with your conclusion. Right then, if you found it useful, you need to be having a look at my playlist in more detail, but also my revision guide. Not all of my tutoring videos are available for free. There's more in my revision guide, talking through loads more questions and tutoring you how to be successful towards a GCSE exam. So have a look at that and find out more about how I can help you. But I hope to see you again soon, and bye bye for now.